Hi, everyone. It's Jenny Whitener with Bridge Innovate, and welcome to today's session, How Virtual Reality Teaches the Innovation Mindset. We are just waiting for a last few minutes for a few people to join in, so welcome. Get ready, get set for a great session. You can see Marshall is actually outdoors having a great time today, just a little bit close to Chattanooga, but not quite in the Chattanooga area. And we will be introducing him shortly. So again, if you're joining us today, we're here for the How Virtual Reality Teaches the Innovation Mindset with our guest speaker, Marshall Mosher. So Mary, if you'll just take us on to the next slide. Okay, let's move ahead. So throughout today's session, if you have questions, you want to make comments, please continue to use the chat. We'd love to hear from you, and I know Marshall would too. So again, welcome to Bridge Innovate's Inspire series. We've had a great time since March, sort of opening up the microphone and having great inspirational leaders from all segments of the industry sharing their story. Bridge Innovate's a global network of business strategists, consultants, and leaders who work alongside you to solve problems and create defining moments. So welcome to our session today with Marshall. Let's keep going. So Marshall Mosher is the CEO and founder of Vestigo. I had an opportunity to meet Marshall actually through a relationship through UGA. He and I are both Bulldog alumni. We recently had a project working with the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center, and one of the faculty there said, you need to meet Marshall, and I'm so glad that they introduced us. So it's been a great pleasure getting to know him. He is so exciting, his life. He's got so many great things going on. I'm gonna let him tell you a bit about how he fuses action, adventure sports, technology, and professional development all together. It's pretty smashing. Marshall, off to you. Tell folks about yourself and take us through the program today.
For sure. Thanks so much for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me virtually here, not in Chattanooga, like Jenny said, but just north of Chattanooga in what's called the Sequatchie Valley. I love paragliding, and as Jenny mentioned, all kinds of action adventure sports and linking the lessons of peak performance, adaptability, communication under pressure, a lot of themes that come from the world of action adventure sports, and putting that into leadership development, especially innovation training. So essentially, innovation is all about navigating the unknown while staying calm and collected under pressure. And today I'm actually participating in a paragliding competition up here at a place called Flying Camp, just north of Chattanooga, where the entire week we have pilots from all over the world, almost 100 people that will be up in the skies navigating these virtual waypoints, which is how we do paragliding races. Of course, we can't have a finish line and a start line hanging with a banner in the sky somewhere, so we use GPS coordinates we load into our devices to hit these virtual spots around the sky. And everyone's getting ready to take off the next couple hours, and maybe you'll see some people fly through. It's a little bit early for paragliding. We'd like to wait until about 1 o'clock when the sun is directly overhead, heating up the ground, getting that hot air to rise, and we actually ride the rising hot air to stay in the air for hours at a time. Kind of like how a hot air balloon works, but without the balloon part. So hopefully we'll see some people fly in the background, but maybe a little bit too early. But for anyone who's in Chattanooga, definitely come up here at some point and check it out. All kinds of really amazing things. But I want to go ahead and start off the chat today with a question for the group. Who has used experiential, just virtual reality type technology before? Has anyone had a chance to try it? And if you have, go ahead and post in the chat. And it'd be really interesting to see who's had this experience before. And I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the history before we get started as well. Okay, awesome. Yeah, with your kids. It's really funny how kids, of course, drive a lot of adoption of new technology. And it's funny when a lot of my friends want to learn something new from a tech standpoint, they give it to their kids and their kids teach them how to do it. Virtual reality is kind of similar. So some of the latest VR headsets, the main market for it is actually from a video game standpoint. But it has so many use cases for leadership development and enterprise use as well, whether it's working remotely in a virtual office with your coworkers. We can stream your computer into a virtual environment and be next to an avatar version of your coworker or your friend in a virtual coffee shop. Or why make it a coffee shop when you can make it a crater on Mars because it's virtual? All kinds of really cool use cases, and a lot of people have experienced it with their kids before. So yeah, that's great to see. To give you a little bit of a history of VR, there's two types of virtual reality headsets. And if you've ever used one and said, oh, I don't like that, it gives me motion sickness, you've probably tried the older type, which isn't really virtual reality, what's called a 360 video viewer. That means you can put the headset on your head. If you've had a phone that you put in like a cardboard case or any kind of external case, and put that on your head, that's a 360 video viewer. It lets you look around and see essentially a dome of video that's playing all around you, but you can't move around or interact with anything in that virtual environment. Real virtual reality has what's called 6 degrees of freedom, which means it really transforms the environment you're in into a virtual one, which means that just like a real environment over here, I can take a step this way. And as I take a step this way, I move in the real world. Just like in virtual reality, when you take a step to the side with 6 degrees of freedom virtual reality, actually move in the virtual world. You can pick up virtual objects, interact with virtual things, even shake virtual hands of friends or coworkers. And that's where the real immersion comes from. That's what we use, which is these headsets right here, the Oculus Quest, which actually have these 4 sensors on the outside, cameras that scan the environment around you so that you can effectively move around that environment. And that's where the real immersion factor comes from. It's always interesting to hear whether people have tried virtual reality, because a lot of times we've had the chance to try the much easier, more accessible version, which is via the phone, but kind of gives virtual reality a bad rap because it's not really virtual reality and it does cause that motion sickness. So if that has happened to you, don't write off virtual reality just yet. It's gotten a lot better, and I'm really excited to explain how we're using it for leadership development. But in the way we're using it, I know this talk is about virtual reality and how it helps to build the innovation mindset, but virtual reality is kind of like the vehicle we use to drive to the destination. It's really not the end result. The end result is actually the growth mindset, essentially, or more specifically, how mindset can be a powerful tool in navigating the unknown, and why navigating the unknown is an important element in the innovation process. And virtual reality is our tool to experientially teach that. Of course, we can do it in real life, but that involves everyone being in the same place. And now more than ever, teams are remote. And even before COVID, a lot of teams had remote employees all over the country. So instead of requiring everyone to get together for an in-person experience, virtual reality gives us the vehicle to be able to do what feels like in-person experiential leadership training completely remotely, regardless of geographic boundaries. So before I jump into how we do that, I think it's really important to talk about why mindset matters and what these experiences are so effective in creating. And to do that, I have to talk a little bit about the psychology of what our brains biologically crave more than anything else. And I also want to turn this over to the audience. If you have any ideas to the answer to this question, post them in the chat below, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do our brains need most? Not biologically from like an oxygen standpoint, of course we need oxygen to breathe, but fundamentally and emotionally, psychologically, what do our brains need most to feel at ease and to feel comfortable? Any ideas? Connection, for sure. Yeah, connection is really a big one, and connection actually contributes to the thing I'm about to describe. It's a component of that. Security, yeah, absolutely. Security is another way to say certainty. So our brains crave knowing what's going to happen next and being right when that thing happens. You can go to the next slide, Mary. So certainty is really what we love most, and certainty is a big factor of predictability. We really like knowing what's going to happen next, predicting what's going to happen next, and being right when that thing happens. So if we love predictability, we love certainty, which goes back to connection, security. What do our brains reject most? Of course, it's the opposite of this. It's uncertainty. We really don't like being caught off guard. And there's a really specific biological reason for that. And I want to explain where this comes from, because this is a really big component of why everyone in the world has this base desire for stability and predictability, and this just natural innate desire to avoid uncertainty. Because during the evolution of our species, dying was rather easy. If you weren't sure there was a predator hiding behind the rock behind you, it was almost always too late. So our brains evolved to predict. And if you couldn't predict, you died. Those that best predicted threats are the ones that survived and passed on their genes to their offspring, and those that did not predict those threats were not as lucky. And this process repeated over thousands and thousands of years, instilling this biological love for certainty into the very genetics of who we are. in an effort to, of course, increase the longevity of our species and our offspring. And throughout this period of human evolution, we lived in environments that were almost exactly the same from the day we were born to the day we died. Of course, the day the wheel was invented, maybe by the time you died, a better wheel was invented. Not a whole lot of technological progress. The fabric of the society we live in was relatively very similar, very linear from the day we were born to the day we died for most of the evolution of humanity. But for the first time in history, this is no longer the case. And because it's no longer the case, our default human desire for stability and safety is a mindset that no longer serves our best interests in a world of exponential change, which is mainly driven by exponential technology. Now, our superpower as humans is adaptability and having a love for uncertainty and change. And our ability to drive through that uncertainty is what makes us successful. Where in most of the evolution of humanity, our ability to avoid uncertainty is what made us successful. And technology is the reason for this, the driver for this. If you've ever heard of Moore's Law, if you're around the tech space a lot, you've probably heard of this. So one of the co-founders of Intel made a really interesting discovery in the 1960s that the number of transistors on a microprocessor seemed to double about every 2 years, which means that the computing process, computing power seemed to double about every 2 years as well, which is pretty fascinating to create this exponential change in the fabric of the world we live in that's driven by an exponential change in technology. Of course, starting from the printing press in in 1400s, when we could finally disseminate ideas on a large scale, all the way up to some of the things we have now with the incredible technology we're building. A lot of that has followed Moore's Law, which means that there's an exponential change in the environment we live in, driven by an exponential growth in technology, that doubling of computing process power every 2 years. Now, Moore's Law has actually slowed down in the past few years, and that's because of quantum computing and a lot of other factors. But it's still on this relatively exponential curve, not truly exponential anymore, but still very rapidly increasing, to the point where the only certainty in the society we live in, especially in 2020, is a whole lot of uncertainty. And our ability to navigate that uncertainty is what ultimately makes us successful as an individual and as a company in terms of the innovation process. Being able to keep a calm, collected mindset while navigating the unknown leads to eventually finding that successful solution, which is essentially innovation, successful innovation. If you go ahead and go to the next slide, I want to point out what this actually feels like in our brains. Of course, our brains don't follow Moore's Law because of the evolution of the technology we have in our head. So psychologically, when the sort of our experience of how our brains like to navigate the world is overlaid over what is actually going on right now, it looks a little bit like the next slide, what I like to call the experiential growth surprise factor. We think we're going to be somewhere that is linearly relative to where we are right now, but in reality, we end up somewhere completely different based on that exponential change in the fabric of society we live in that creates a lot of confusion and chaos and frustration because of our default mindset of the love for certainty. And when this is applied to companies, if you jump to the next slide, this is what I like to call the corporate immune system. So the aggregate of this hardwired resistance to change is this corporate immune system, which is an often subconscious process that tends to drive out innovation and entrepreneurial activity within organizations, often found within larger multi-divisional companies where it sometimes manifests as interdivisional fighting, most oftentimes very subtle or unintended. And while we may be born with this we're born with this resistance to change, we don't have to live with it. Of course, we have the power to embrace adaptability and change with the right mindset. Go ahead and jump to the next slide. So this is why mindset is so important, especially the growth mindset specifically, of jumping into a new, unfamiliar, and by the nature of unfamiliar, uncomfortable situation, and having the mindset that that situation is good for you, that situation is going to cause growth, and be able to come out of the other side of that stressful, hard situation a more productive, more capable, and more confident individual, both as an individual and as a team. And mindset is the key element that allows us to get there. So how do we build mindset? Just like any other muscle we exercise in the gym, it takes a lot of practice. So if you jump into the next slide, I want to show a little bit of a case study in how we build the growth mindset and how we help people get outside their comfort zone and navigate the unknown. So this is an example of a virtual reality experience that we would do in person. Now we're doing them all completely remotely, where we ship the headsets to every individual participant that is jumping on from their house or from their home office, wherever they are. And we're using a combination of both VR and Zoom to facilitate the experience. But the experiential piece in VR is really the important catalyst for change. And that's exactly what they're doing in these videos. So there's two activities that we did with a company called PREDICTABILIty here in Atlanta in this video that shows a little bit about what it is about the experiential piece that allows us to practice that growth mindset and that ability to navigate the unknown. Two of these experiences that are shown in this video, this one is the bomb diffusion experience, where one person in the headset is in front of this ticking time bomb with a bunch of wires and buttons and absolutely no idea how to diffuse the situation that is about to literally explode in their face. Of course, their teammates right next to them can't see what they're seeing. You notice that the people on their phones that have the instruction manual on how to defuse the bomb were intentionally facing away from the person in the headset and the TV that was showcasing what the bomb looked like. They weren't allowed to see the situation. When we do this virtually, it's a lot easier because you aren't in the same physical location to be able to cheat if you wanted to. But the team with the instruction manual has to be able to figure out what the person in the headset is seeing on this complicated time bomb in order to relay the right instructions in a time-sensitive environment, where VR makes it feel like you're actually in front of a real time bomb that's going to explode with a 5-minute countdown timer if your team doesn't give you the right instructions. It makes the stakes feel real, and when the stakes feel real, it elevates our level of fear in the situation, which is the only way to really, truly practice pushing through that uncomfortable situation and building that growth mindset. When the stakes aren't real, your brain doesn't trigger that fear response in the hippocampus, which makes you fearful and uncomfortable with the situation. So any just Zoom-based activity or conference room-based activity isn't as effective as if the stakes feel real. Of course, there's plenty of other ways to make the stakes feel real. But that is really the key in getting your body to experience that fear response and being able to keep a calm, level-headed demeanor to be able to push through that fear and focus in the presence of fear and chaos to come out successful on the other side. One of the other experiences you saw in this video was one called the plank walk. You saw a couple people walking across this plank. That's one that we use just to teach how much mindset matters, and oftentimes how mindset is not as directly correlated with logic as we think it is. With that experience, you are walking across either a physical or just a physical plank or just a straight line in your floor. Without the headset, of course, that's extremely easy. We do it every day. But with the headset, the plank looks like it's coming out of the side of a 100-story building and actually replicates that fear of heights. It makes us hesitant to do something we know is completely fake and completely safe, but it actually recreates that fear-based response in a way that makes us hesitant to do something that logically we have absolutely no problem with, but emotionally we're paralyzed with fear and unable to take the step out on the plank that looks like it's coming out of the side of a 100-story building. That does an excellent job of showcasing to the entire team and all the participants the difference between perceived risk and actual risk, the difference between the emotional side of navigating the unknown and the logical side. It creates this cognitive dissonance between how we think we should feel and how we actually feel, which is a really important element to point out in the sense that most of our decision and the way that we approach problems is from an emotional side. Even if we don't think that's the case or hope that's not the case, we usually make decisions emotionally and back them up with logic. We also solve problems this way as well. So our ability to push through the fearful emotions that come out when you're in a stressful environment directly affect our ability to logically attack that situation with extra steps on top of that. If we're really scared in an environment, it really inhibits our ability to logically take the next step and successfully defuse the bomb, cross the plank, or any other type of stressful task. And of course, a fear of heights is what we're emulating in this experience. But what I'm actually doing right now is the number one fear in the US, public speaking. So of course, there's plenty of ways to experientially help practice this, even without the right tools to do things like this. Of course, virtual reality, we have a whole large arsenal of different ways we can recreate this, but just helping people practice getting up in front of an audience, doing a stand-up comedy skit or an improv skit, speaking in front of a public audience, also brings out that fear response and allows us to practice having that growth mindset, getting outside of our comfort zone, and being able to increase our performance in that type of environment. So that's a little bit of an overview of one of the key elements psychologically of navigating the unknown and the innovation process, and how we use virtual reality as a tool to help practice that growth mindset. But I want to go ahead and pause it here and let anyone give everyone the chance to ask any questions that you may have in terms of how virtual reality can be used for all kinds of use cases, even outside of leadership development training and experiential training. And any questions that I can help to help you personally or your team in terms of how virtual reality is going to be, and I say is because we're at a really exciting point in history of virtual reality that's really going to transform how people use it, which I can explain in a little bit as well. But I'd love to give you the chance to ask any questions and help you to understand this technology so you can better implement it for your team, whether it's physical training, leadership development training, or just remote work capabilities and using it as a powerful tool for this remote world that we live in right now. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat below, and I'll jump into answering some of those. And we have the first one. Let's see. Do you have more custom applications coming with VR? Yes, we do actually. So just like Jenny was explaining in the beginning, our sweet spot is using the themes of outdoor action adventure sports in leadership development. You probably noticed that the bomb diffusion and the plank walk are not very outdoorsy. They do recreate the same fear that a lot of these things do, but not really an outdoorsy environment. So those were our first two prototype experiences. We just have a great video on that. But some of the ones that we are in the process of building, and a few that we've already finished, are things like crossing a crevasse at the base of Mount Everest, which also recreates that fear of heights element, but has a little bit of teamwork involved in it as well. If anyone has seen the movie Everest or read the book Into Thin Air, you'll know that just north of base camp, the first step along the very long and challenging journey to the top of Mount Everest is actually one of the hardest ones. It's crossing this large glacier field where you have to get across these massive fissures in the ice called crevasses. And the way they do that is by strapping these ladders together and laying them across the crevasse, and you have to walk across this ladder. Where if you fall off the ladder, you're gonna have a bad day. So we recreated an actual crevasse at the base of Mount Everest, very similar to how the plank walk works in terms of recreating that fear of heights, but we have a few communication elements in it as well, where your team is actually in the environment. We can have a blizzard come in, give you a whiteout environment, so the person on the ladder can't see where they're going and have to listen to their team in terms of where to step, what to do, and ultimately be able to practice that mindset of calming down and focusing in the presence of fear. Another one that's a free climbing experience, a cave diving experience, and a few others, where we're actually taking some of the world's leading experts in a lot of these action adventure sports and baking their experience into the application, both from a design standpoint and from a facilitation standpoint. And a lot of the best in the world Red Bull action adventure sport athletes are incredible public speakers, where they'll oftentimes speak and tell their story about some amazing feat that they did before we do the experience, and give everyone a little bit of inspiration before actually giving participants the chance to practice a small piece of that experience in virtual reality. So those are some things that we're designing and building right now that we should have done in the next few months. And we've got one of those ready right now. A few other questions. Could you use VR for VR meeting simulation? Absolutely. Yeah. So imagine you're sitting around a conference room table, and instead of looking at the real version of your coworkers or friends, it's an avatar version, meaning it's pretty cartoony. It kind of looks like a Pixar movie at best, but it does trick your brain into thinking you're there. The first 5 minutes are a little bit weird, but after you spend 10, 20, 30 minutes in VR, when you come out of VR, getting back into the real world is weird. So your brain adjusts to this weird avatar version of your friend or coworker, but does recreate that feeling of being in person. You can have virtual screens in VR, so you can give virtual presentations, virtual whiteboards, virtual markers. And of course, why would you need to write on the whiteboard with a marker when you can just write in the air? Because it's fake. Our imagination is the limit. So all kinds of really cool things you can do from a meeting standpoint in VR. And a great app for that is called Immersed VR and Meet in VR. Immersed is more for streaming your computer into VR and being next to your coworkers. Meet in VR is more for creative kind of problem solving type things. We can see 3D schematics of designs and use a marker to write and draw in the air and things like that, but all kinds of great applications for remote work that VR is empowering as well. Let's see, can companies use customized VR to teach business processes like customer service or programming, coaching? Others for VR is rapidly being adopted in healthcare. Absolutely, yeah. So the biggest area of VR training and development is on the hard skills side. We're tackling the soft skills side, the leadership development side, but most of what VR is used for right now in the technical training skills side is teaching those exact same things, being in an environment that can help someone practice interacting with someone from a customer service standpoint, but mostly being in an environment that you can teach a Starbucks employee how to use the Starbucks barista machine without shutting down a Starbucks for training, or teaching an engineer how to use a particular part of a mechanical piece of hardware without the risk that they're going to get hurt from whatever danger is involved with that type of activity. So Delta's used VR pretty extensively for teaching mechanics how to walk around planes, look for damage, all kinds of things like that. FedEx, some of the larger companies are creating these technical training programs. And that has been a really great boost in the VR training space, but there's not a whole lot of focus on the leadership development side using VR, and that's where we like to spend most of our time. Let's see, Mary, do you see any questions that I missed, or any other ones coming through?
Marshall, it was great. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. One of the things I was just thinking about as people see if there are any other questions is you're talking about leadership development. And I know in a number of the corporate environments where we've been asked to come in and do some executive coaching, it's always really challenging and really fearful for a leader to try new tactics in coaching their employees. If you have a problem situation or a complex situation. And so we try to do it in role play, but how great would it be if they could do it through virtual reality and build that confidence around having those difficult conversations before they actually have to do it. So I think it would be a great combination. It looks like a couple of things coming in. One is VR specifically used for visual learners, or do you see it being adaptive to other types of learning styles?
That's a good question. So we all learn differently, of course. There's a lot of research in terms of this thing called the forgetting curve, of how fast we forget something when we learn it. And of course, there's different learning styles, but over a randomized selection of people in a double-blind test to get good results, they found that experientially doing something creates about a 75% retention after, I think it was 30 days, whereas just hearing it or writing it or speaking it, I think was anywhere from 15% to like 30%. So it was a massive jump to actually physically practice something. I know you can't physically practice everything. I think they had a lot of different things in the study, and I'm happy to send that. It's in the Harvard Business Review. But I'm sure there are certain things that is not as good in VR. Like for instance, if you're reading a lot of text, you can read text in VR, but the resolution of the screen is almost like reading text through foggy glasses sometimes, if it's really small, fine print. So I would imagine there's probably better use cases and worse use cases. That specific problem is going to get better in the future, just with better technology, just like phone screens, TV screens have gotten better, higher resolution. That's happening in the VR space as well. The main goal of VR is to make you forget that you're in VR, to recreate an environment where you feel like you're actually a part of that environment. The best movie I can recommend to see what the future of this could look like, of course, it's a dystopian world because it's a movie, but it's Ready Player One. It's actually a way better book than it is a movie, but that's a really great story in terms of what the future of virtual reality could look like. And that may answer some other questions in VR as well. It's a great Steven Spielberg movie, just came out a couple years ago too, so it's great to watch with the kids, and it's a lot of fun.
Great. Well, Marshall, thank you so much for joining us from the Sequatchie Valley today, just north of Chattanooga. A beautiful day for you. I know that we're at time, so I want to just wrap us up and say thanks again to Marshall. You can find more about him at vestigo.co. So www.vestigo.co, and he also has a QR code here on the slide if you want to reach out to him directly, and we'll continue to stay engaged with Marshall and keep up with what he's doing. It's pretty amazing. So if you're thinking about what's next on the Inspire series, we have a number of other webinars coming up. Planning for Failure coming up on September the 18th. Work in the 21st Century, Thinking of Organizations as Organisms on October 2nd. And Unpacking the Future, Making Sense of Your Own Crystal Ball on October the 14th. All very inspirational speakers, and we would love to see you again over the lunch hour. So join us again for another Inspire series. And thank you, Marshall at Vestigo, CEO and founder of Vestigo. Thank you so much for joining us today, and be safe and have a fabulous time this afternoon.
Thanks, Jenny. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining everyone as well. And if you want to see a little bit about what paragliding looks like, if you got a chance to scan that QR code, got a bunch of links in there. One is to Instagram. I post pretty much all the videos of paragliding on that with the story and the news feed and all. So if you want to see what some of the competition is like and just a little bit about a paragliding competition, check that out. Definitely reach out to me for any questions. Happy to help however I can. And thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you. Bye now.
Marshall. Bye, everyone.
Bye.